It was a damp Friday evening in early November when Eunice Hale's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, bearing a city code from Camden Hill, a borough just north of Hollow Ridge. She paused, drying her hands on a dish towel before answering. "Is this the next of kin of Mr. Marcus Hale?" a flat voice asked. Her heart clutched in her chest. Marcus, her eldest, had been living alone in a housing project after a lengthy struggle with heart disease. The woman on the line introduced herself as a clerk from Southridge Medical Examiner's office and, in clinical tones, informed Eunice that Marcus had been found deceased in his apartment. "Time of death estimated November 5th, the voice said. "We believe it was due to natural causes." Eunice dropped the phone. The news hit her with a cold finality she hadn't been ready for, even after a decade of late-night emergency calls and silent birthdays. 2 days later, Eunice and her youngest son, Daryl, made their way to the Southridge morgue to identify Marcus' body. The facility was cold and gray, its walls lined with steel drawers and the faint smell of bleach and ammonia. The attendant, a young man with hollow eyes and too many responsibilities, rolled out a gurney and lifted the sheet. "This him?" he asked flatly. Eunice leaned closer. The body beneath the sheet was waxy and still, but it was Marcus. The round chin, the narrow scar under his left eye, the fingers calloused from years as a mechanic. She nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. They signed the papers and made arrangements for a wake and open casket funeral, scheduled for November 12th at Hollow Ridge Grace Baptist Church. Eunice left with one desire, to give her son the goodbye he never got in life. On the morning of November 10th, the funeral director, Mr. Lewins, arrived at the Southridge morgue to collect Marcus' body. He'd done this hundreds of times before and expected routine. But when he provided Marcus' paperwork, the attendant scratched his head. "He's not here," the man said. Lewins blinked. "What do you mean he's not here?" A supervisor was called. A search began. File drawers were yanked open, logs were flipped through, and whispers grew urgent. "It says here the body was released on the 7th. To who?" "Not you." Panic crept into Lewin's chest. He called Eunice, hesitant and apologetic. "Mrs. Hale, there's been a problem." When she heard the words missing and body, her knees buckled. Daryl had to wrestle the phone from her hand. For 12 days, Marcus Hale was lost. Eunice spent each night sitting by her front window, staring into darkness, whispering prayers to a God she wasn't sure was listening. Then, on November 22nd, she received another call, this time from a coroner's office in Pine Valley, Pennsylvania. "Mrs. Hale, we believe your son was buried here, in a municipal plot." Eunice's breath caught. The man explained that a body had been received from Camden Hill with paperwork naming the deceased as Marcus Hale. The body had been buried in a pauper's field with others who died without claim. The funeral home that had picked up the body believed it belonged to a different Marcus Hiley, a 61-year-old man from Pittsburgh. The names were similar. The bodies were not. Eunice traveled to Pine Valley with Daryl and a hired attorney. The funeral home director at Hollowstone Funeral Services looked pale and rattled. "We received a body labeled Marcus Hiley. All the identification matched. Birth date, social, next of kin. We didn't know it wasn't our Marcus." Eunice gripped the edge of her chair. "You never checked his face?" The man faltered. "He was in a sealed body bag. The paperwork matched. We had a service. A burial." Eunice nearly vomited. The man they'd buried was not their Marcus. Somewhere in this mess, identities had been swapped, papers duplicated, and her son had been cremated without dignity. The church service she had planned, the open casket, the hymn, "Precious Lord," the final goodbye, none of it would happen, all because someone hadn't opened a zipper. On December 2nd, Marcus' body was exhumed from a grave marked Hiley M. It had been raining for 3 days, and the cemetery smelled of mud and something heavier, decay. The coffin was lifted, and the remains were transported back to Camden Hill. But Marcus was no longer the man Eunice had once kissed goodbye in a sterile morgue. A week buried in wet earth had bloated and blackened his body. The funeral home refused to allow an open casket. "He's decomposed beyond viewing," the mortician said gently. "We recommend cremation." Eunice collapsed into Daryl's arms, screaming into his jacket. The fire that would claim her son was not a holy rite. It was a bureaucratic correction. He was cremated on December 8th. By January, the Hales filed a lawsuit against both the city of Camden Hill and the Southridge Medical Examiner's office. The claim was simple: wrongful interference with their right to possess Marcus' body, emotional distress, and egregious mishandling of human remains. The city's lawyers tried to settle quickly, offering a meager $50,000. But Eunice refused. "They lost my child. They buried him like garbage. I want the truth told." During discovery, documents showed that Marcus' body had been signed out using a generic transfer form. No signature, no ID confirmation. A clerical assistant had mistaken Marcus Hiley for Marcus Hale. The names were close. The lives weren't. In February, the trial began. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with quiet outrage. Eunice testified, her voice quivering. "I never got to say goodbye. I kissed a stranger. I buried a ghost." The jury listened to experts describe morgue protocols and how a system built on standard procedure had collapsed under carelessness. The city argued the mistake was tragic, but understandable. The jury didn't agree. They awarded Eunice $800,000 for her suffering. The city immediately appealed. 2 years later, the appellate court handed down its decision. The amount was excessive. While the emotional distress was significant, they wrote, "For $100,000 is a more reasonable compensation." Eunice read the verdict in silence. "They lost my son," she whispered, "and now they're counting my pain." But she didn't cry. Not anymore. The grief had calcified into something else. Not bitterness, but a quiet, permanent ache. Eunice never threw another Christmas dinner. The kitchen went quiet. The grandchildren visited less. She kept Marcus' urn on a high shelf, wrapped in a cloth of his favorite football team, the Hollow Ridge Warriors. Every so often, she'd take it down, sit in the living room, and talk to it like he was still there. Daryl, now married with 2 children, took over legal advocacy work, focusing on wrongful cremation and morgue misconduct. "My brother was stolen twice," he once told a journalist. "First by death, then by indifference." In the wake of the case, Southridge Medical Examiner's office introduced biometric verification before body releases. Fingerprints were scanned. Photos required. ID confirmed twice. But for Marcus Hale, it was too late. His name would live in court records, in news clippings, and in the memory of a woman who only wanted to see her son's face one last time. Eunice had always believed that death, at the very least, offered closure. Now she knew that even grief could be stolen by a clipboard and a rushed clerk. In life, we fight to be seen, for who we are, what we love, and those we leave behind. But even in death, that dignity can be erased by a single careless act. Marcus Hale wasn't just another name on a morgue form. He was a son, a brother, a man who deserved to be remembered. Not misplaced, not mislabeled, not cremated like a clerical error. In healthcare, and especially in death care, there is no room for shortcuts. Because when the paperwork fails, the consequences aren't measured in numbers, they're measured in pain. One missing body became a symbol of how quickly dignity can disappear when compassion is left out of the process. Always double-check, always slow down, and always remember, every body is a somebody to someone. Subscribe to the White Coat Crimes for more shocking true stories, medical crimes, medical mysteries, and the dark side of healthcare you were never meant to see.